Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take that huge stack of sources you send our way and, well, we try to make sense of it all for you, the learner.
And today, we are talking about an absolute icon, a giant. Dame Jane Goodall.
It's hard to even know where to start. We're talking about the English primatologist and anthropologist who was, there's no other way to say it, she was the world's expert on chimpanzees.
For over 6 decades. 6 decades of pioneering field research that it changed everything.
So our mission for you today is, it's a bit complicated because her life wasn't just one thing. It was a series of transformations.
It really was.
We have to unpack the science, of course, these revolutionary discoveries that really just shattered our definition of what it means to be human. But we also have to get into the controversies, right? The challenges to her methods.
And then there's that huge shift.
Yeah.
The monumental move she makes from being this quiet, isolated observer in the forest to a global activist, a founder of institutions.
It's a huge arc. And the big picture, really, is that Jane Goodall fundamentally redrew the line between us and the rest of the animal kingdom.
Absolutely. Before her, we were pretty comfortable with the idea that things like tool use, complex emotions, lasting social bonds, even the dark stuff, like organized warfare.
That was all ours, uniquely human.
And her work showed, step by step, that chimpanzees share all of it, which forces you to ask some pretty profound questions about our own place in the world.
And for this, we are drawing from an incredible wealth of material. It covers her entire life, from this really unconventional start to her career all the way through to the Kyoto Prize, the Templeton Prize, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
And her cultural impact, which is just massive. So it's a lot to get through.
It is. So let's jump in. Let's start this journey right where it began, with a childhood gift. So Jane Goodall was born in London, April 1934. And the sources point to this one really pivotal moment in her childhood that feels like perfect foreshadowing.
It really does. It's all about a gift from her father.
Mm.
When she was just a little girl, he didn't give her a teddy bear, which would have been the normal thing to do.
Right.
He gave her a lifelike stuffed toy chimpanzee. She named it Jubilee.
And this wasn't exactly a hit with everyone, was it?
Oh, not at all. She said her mother's friends were, and I think this is her word, horrified. They thought it was this monstrous thing that would give a child nightmares.
A fear of the wild right there in the nursery.
Exactly. But for her, it was the opposite. She credits that specific toy, Jubilee, with sparking her deep early love for animals. It was the beginning of everything.
I love that detail. And as a little side note, the sources say that even as late as the year 2000, that same toy, Jubilee, was still sitting on her dresser in her London home.
Wow. It just shows that connection was real and it was lifelong.
So this early passion starts to focus. It becomes this magnetic pull towards one place in particular, Africa.
She was absolutely determined to get there. She worked as a waitress, saved every penny she could for the fare, and finally in 1957, she makes it to Kenya.
And she's working as a secretary there, just sort of finding her feet, when a friend gives her a piece of advice that changes her entire life.
It's this incredible moment of serendipity meets sheer nerve. She just picks up the phone. She calls the famous archaeologist and paleontologist Louis Leakey.
Just to make an appointment, not for a job, but just to talk.
Just to talk about animals. She was curious, she was passionate, and she just reached out.
But Leakey, as it turns out, he had his own agenda. He saw something in her.
He did. Leakey had this theory, which was pretty controversial at the time. He believed that if we study the behavior of living great apes, it could give us clues, real insights into how our own early human ancestors might have lived.
So he was looking for someone to study chimps.
He was actively looking. But he needed someone with a very specific set of skills. Tenacity, patience, an open mind. And maybe most importantly, someone who wasn't already indoctrinated by the rigid scientific thinking of the time.
Someone without a formal degree, maybe?
Precisely. So he doesn't offer her the research gig right away. First, he hires her as his secretary. It's a test, really, a test of her commitment.
And she passes. And after getting the okay from his wife and research partner, the legendary Mary Leakey, he starts bringing her into the fold. He sends her to Olduvai Gorge.
And that's where he finally lays out the grand plan. He wants her to go into the forest and study chimpanzees.
To live with them.
But first, he sends her to London for a bit of a crash course.
A very brief one, yes. In 1958, she studied primate behavior with Osman Hill and primate anatomy with John Napier. just to give her a bit of a scientific framework before throwing her into the deep end.
Which brings us to this, this just incredible academic hurdle she had to clear. It really shows what a trailblazer she was. It's astonishing. She's out there doing this groundbreaking research, but on paper, she has no qualifications, no degree at all.
So Leakey pulls some strings,
What?
he secures funding, and in 1962 he sends her to one of the most prestigious universities in the world.
Cambridge.
Ah.
And get this. She was only the 8th person in the entire history of the university allowed to study for a PhD without having a bachelor's degree first.
The 8th person. Ever.
It just tells you how powerful Leakey's recommendation was and how much potential he must have seen in her.
And she's studying ethology. For our listeners, what exactly is that?
Ethology is the scientific study of animal behavior, but specifically in their natural environment. And it was very strict, very objective field back then.
Which, as we'll see, put her on a direct collision course with her professors.
Absolutely. But she succeeded. She got her PhD in 1966. Her thesis was called Behavior of Free-Living Chimpanzees, and it was based on her first 5 years of groundbreaking work at Gombe.
And that work, the work that would define her legacy, started on July 14th, 1960. That's when she first arrived at what is now Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania.
And her arrival marks the beginning of the primates, as they became known. The 3 pioneering women Leakey sponsored to study great apes, Jane with the chimps, Diane Fossey with gorillas, and Burute Galdikas with orangutans.
But there's a crucial detail about her arrival in Gombe, a condition that was placed on her by the chief warden.
Yes, David Anstey. He was. Well, he was deeply concerned for the safety of a young woman going out into this remote, potentially dangerous wilderness all by herself.
So he insisted she couldn't go alone.
He did. The condition was that she had to have a chaperone.
Yeah.
And so she was accompanied by her mother, Margaret.
Her mom went with her to the jungle to study chimps.
And Jane always said how crucial that was. She said that in the late 50s and early 60s, women just were not accepted in that male-dominated field. Her mother's presence gave her a kind of a social legitimacy that allowed the whole project to even get off the ground.
It's an amazing start to the story. And it's so incredible to think that this field, primatology, which was so biased against women when she started, is now, thanks in large part to her example, almost evenly split between men and women.
That's a legacy in itself, even before you get to the science.
Okay, so if that was the start, this next part is the revolution. This is the research at Gombe that, and this isn't an exaggeration, it forced humanity to rethink itself.
It truly did. And the first shot in that revolution was a seemingly small decision she made, but it was a massive breach of scientific protocol in the 1960s.
She refused to give the chimpanzees numbers.
Exactly. The standard practice, the rule, was to assign numbers to your subjects. Subject A, subject B. It was all about maintaining objectivity, this clinical emotional distance.
But she looked at them and saw individuals.
She saw personalities, so she named them. And this was just not done. It was seen as the first step towards anthropomorphism, towards bias.
And it wasn't just the naming, was it? Her supervisors at Cambridge were also highly critical of her language.
Oh, deeply critical. She would use words like childhood, adolescence, motivation, excitement, mood, everyday words we use to describe our own inner lives. To the scientific community, that was heresy.
She said herself that even suggesting chimpanzees had personalities was considered the worst of ethological sins.
It was. Science demanded cold, hard, observable facts. She was writing a story, a rich, emotional narrative about the lives of these individuals.
Oh, why did she stick to her guns on this? Why was this personal narrative approach so important?
Because it was the key. It was what worked. By breaking down that wall of clinical distance, she was able to build a level of trust that no one had ever achieved before. The sources say she was eventually accepted into chimpanzee society.
And that intimacy, that acceptance, was what allowed her to see what no one else had seen.
Precisely. It was the necessary first step for everything that came next.
And this is where the story really comes alive, with these incredible characters, these chimpanzee personalities who became famous around the world.
You have to talk about them. It all started with David Graybeard. He was the male with the distinctive gray hair on his chin, and he was the first one, the first chimp to lose his fear of her and let her get close. He was the bridge.
And then there was the alpha, Goliath.
Named for his dominance, a classic, powerful alpha male. But then he was overthrown.
Not by brute force, though. This is where it gets interesting. He was displaced by Mike.
And Mike's rise to power was a masterclass in strategy. He figured out that if he took empty kerosene cans from her camp and charged the other males while banging them together, it made a terrifying noise.
It was psychological warfare.
It was pure cunning. He used a tool, an artificial object, to intimidate his rivals and become the alpha, an early sign of just how intelligent they were.
And of course, you can't talk about Gombe without talking about Flo.
Flo is arguably the most important individual in the whole study, a high-ranking, incredibly successful mother. You can always recognize her by her bulbous nose and ragged ears.
And her importance was really her family, right?
Yes, her lineage, Figen, Fabian, Freud, Fifi, and Flint. By following Flo and her children, and then their children, Goodall was able to map these complex family trees over decades. She could see how social status was passed on, how behaviors were learned. It was the first long-term look at a non-human family dynasty.
And it was these individuals, these personalities, who provided the stage for what is maybe the single most important discovery she ever made, the one that changed the textbooks.
The toolmaker revelation.
You have to remember, the definition of humanity back then, especially in Leakey's field of paleoanthropology, was man the toolmaker. That was the line in the sand.
That was what separated us from every other animal. The ability to make and use tools.
So walk us through the moment that definition just crumbled.
She's watching David Graybeard.
Yeah.
He's at a termite mound, and she sees him take a long stalk of grass and poke it down into one of the holes.
Right.
He pulls it out, and it's covered in termites, which he then eats. He's fishing for termites. That, on its own, was a huge discovery. But then came the really critical part.
It wasn't just that he was using the grass.
It's that he was making the tool. She saw chimps take a twig from a tree, a leafy twig, and they would systematically strip off the leaves. They were modifying it, making it a more effective tool to fit into the small holes.
They were engineering a solution.
They were manufacturing a tool for a specific purpose.
Yeah.
And that was the moment everything changed.
She sent a telegram to Leakey, right, to tell him what she'd seen.
She did. And his response has become one of the most famous quotes in the history of science. He cabled back, "We must now redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as human."
That's the paradigm shift right there.
That is it. That one observation, made possible by her patient personal methods, forced the entire scientific world to redraw the boundaries of what it means to be human.
So the early years at Gombe painted this picture of incredible intelligence and a lot of affection. It was a very positive, almost romantic view of our closest relatives.
It was. And she continued to document those positive sides, the deep, affectionate bonds. She saw them hugging, kissing, patting each other on the back, tickling.
Things we would consider very human gestures.
Exactly. And she insisted these weren't just random actions. They were proof of what she called close, supportive, affectionate bonds within families and the community. And these bonds could last a lifetime, over 50 years.
That's the image most of us have of chimps. But as her study went on, for decades, the story she was documenting it got a lot darker.
It really did. She herself said that for the first 10 years, she honestly believed that chimpanzees were, for the most part, rather nicer than human beings.
But then she saw what she called their darker side.
And it was a shock, even to her. She began to observe systematic internal violence. For instance, dominant females would sometimes deliberately kill the babies of other lower-ranking females.
Why? To what end?
To maintain their own dominance. To ensure their own offspring had a better chance of survival. It was ruthless social strategy, and in some cases, it even escalated to cannibalism.
That's horrifying. But the violence went even beyond that, didn't it? It led to this incredible, disturbing discovery of organized warfare.
This is one of the most challenging findings from Gombe, the Gombe Chimpanzee War. It was a documented, systematic conflict that lasted for 4 years, from 1974 to 1978.
How did it start?
It started when the main community, the Kasakela community she was studying, split apart. A smaller group broke off and formed their own community to the south, called the Kahama community.
So it was like a civil war.
In a way, yes. The larger Kasakela group, led by males like Mike, didn't just let them go. They began a campaign to systematically eliminate them.
How did they do it? Was it just random fighting?
No, that's the crucial point. It was organized. It was tactical. The Kasakela males would form these small raiding parties, maybe 4 or 5 of them, and move silently into the other group's territory.
Like a patrol.
Exactly like a patrol. And they would use ambush tactics. They'd find a lone Kahama male, isolate him, and then the whole group would attack him. They'd hold him down, beating and biting him until he was dead or dying. It was brutal and coordinated.
That's chilling. It sounds so much like human conflict.
It is. Over those 4 years, the Kasakela males hunted down and killed every single adult male from the rival group. And once they were all gone, the Kasakela community expanded their territory into the area the Kahama group used to occupy.
So this was the first time this kind of long-term, lethal intergroup violence had ever been seen in non-human primates.
It was unprecedented,
Ye-
and it completely destroyed that romantic notion of the peaceful primate. It showed that the capacity for this kind of organized violence for war is not uniquely human either.
And their diet also turned out to be more aggressive than anyone thought.
Yes, they weren't just peaceful vegetarians. She discovered they are very effective hunters, especially of smaller primates like colobus monkeys.
And these hunts were also cooperative, right?
Highly cooperative. A hunting party would work together to trap a monkey up in a tree. Some chimps would climb up, while others would stay on the ground, blocking all the escape roads. It was a coordinated strategy, and they're incredibly successful predators. The sources say the Gombe chimps kill and eat as much as a third of the colobus monkey population in the park every year.
Wow. So this complex picture of both affection and brutality brings us right to the big scientific debate about her methods.
The feeding stations.
Right. To get the chimps comfortable with her presence early on, she used artificial feeding stations, basically leaving out bananas to draw them in.
It was a way to habituate them, to get close enough for observation, a very common practice in fieldwork at the time.
But it came under heavy fire later on. What was the core of that criticism?
The main argument, which was really laid out by Margaret Power in the early 90s, was that the feeding stations fundamentally changed the chimps' behavior.
How so?
Well, by providing a concentrated, high-value food source, you create an unnatural situation. You get large numbers of chimps crowding into one small area, which they wouldn't do normally. This, the critics argued, artificially increased competition and stress levels.
So the fear was that the aggression, the infanticide, even the Gombe War, that maybe it wasn't natural behavior at all.
Exactly. The worry was that she wasn't observing natural chimpanzee society. She was observing a society that had been distorted by her own intervention, that the violence was a product of the feeding stations.
That's a huge challenge to the validity of her entire life's work. How does she respond to that?
She always maintained that the feeding only affected the intensity of the conflict, not the fundamental nature of it. She argued that the capacity for that kind of aggression was always there, inherent in their nature, and that the feeding stations might have just brought it to the surface more frequently.
Has other research backed that up? Have we seen this kind of warfare in other chimp groups without feeding stations?
Yes, and that's the key point. Other long-term studies in different parts of Africa with completely wild, unprovisioned groups have since documented similar instances of lethal intergroup violence. So that suggests she was right. Provisioning may have exacerbated the conflict at Gombe, but it didn't create it from scratch.
But her own thinking on the feeding stations evolved over time, didn't it?
It did, which is a testament to her as a scientist. Much later, in 2017, she said she would never use them today. But her reasoning had changed.
It wasn't about the aggression anymore.
No, it was about disease. She said there was absolutely no knowledge back then that chimpanzees could catch human infectious diseases. She realized that by bringing them in so close, they were putting the chimps at incredible risk of catching something from the human researchers. That ethical realization, more than anything else, is why provisioning was ultimately stopped at Gombe.
So for decades, Jane Goodall is this field researcher. She's in Gombe, she's observing, she's publishing. But then we get to 1986, and there's this huge pivot, a moment that completely changes her life's work.
It really is a clear dividing line in her career. The catalyst was a big science conference in Chicago called Understanding Chimpanzees.
And she goes there just expecting to present her latest research on chimp behavior.
That was the plan. But as she's sitting there listening to researchers from all over Africa present their findings, she has this dawning, horrifying realization.
What was it?
She realized that all across the continent, chimpanzee populations were just vanishing. They were facing extinction from habitat loss, from poaching, from the illegal bushmeat trade, and she saw that all these different research sites were becoming tiny, isolated islands of forest in a sea of human development.
So she understood that just studying them wasn't enough anymore.
Not nearly enough. She knew that if someone didn't start advocating for them and advocating loudly, there would be no chimpanzees left to study.
And that realization sparks this radical change in her life.
A total transformation. She essentially leaves the forest behind. She goes from a quiet life in a remote research camp to becoming a full-time, globe-trotting activist. By the early 2000s, she was traveling nearly 300 days a year.
Wow. 300 days a year on the road.
for decades, swapping the quiet of Gombe for conference halls, boardrooms, and political meetings.
And she starts building institutions to carry this work forward. It starts with the Jane Goodall Institute, or JGI.
She founded it back in 1977, initially just to provide stable, long-term funding for the Gombe research. But after that 1986 conference, its mission just exploded. It became this global conservation organization, and today it has offices in 19 countries.
And her focus wasn't just on the top-down political level. She also built something from the ground up with young people.
Roots and shoots. This is one of her most enduring legacies. It started so small in 1991, just a group of 12 local teenagers who met with her on her porch in Tanzania to talk about the environmental problems they saw in their own community.
And she empowered them to do something about it.
She did. She helped them design local projects to tackle those problems. And that simple model, identify a problem, make a plan, take action, it just caught fire.
How big did it get?
It became a global movement. By 2010, that little group of 12 had grown into more than 10,000 roots and shoots groups in over 100 countries. It's this incredible youth-driven network focused on helping people, animals, and the environment.
Her work also created these very real physical projects in Africa, like the Chimpunga Chimpanzee Rehabilitation Center.
Yes, in the Republic of Congo. This was a direct response to the horrors of the bushmeat trade. The center was created to care for the orphans, the baby chimps left behind after their mothers were killed for meat.
So it's a sanctuary.
A huge sanctuary, caring for over 100 orphan chimps across 3 protected islands, giving them a second chance at life.
And then there's the Takare Project in Tanzania, which is a really fascinating model for conservation.
The care is brilliant because it's holistic. It's based on this very simple but profound idea. You can't save the chimpanzees if you don't help the people who live alongside them.
So it's not just about protecting the park.
It's about supporting the surrounding communities. Its main goal is to reduce the pressure on the forest. So they do reforestation projects, they teach sustainable farming methods, but they also do something else.
This is the really interesting part.
They invest in people. Specifically, Takare provides reproductive health education and college scholarships for young girls in the local villages.
And I want to be clear on the connection here. How does sending a girl to college help save chimpanzees?
It's a powerful long-term strategy. When you educate girls and empower women, you see a number of positive outcomes. Family sizes tend to get smaller, poverty rates go down, and when you have smaller, more prosperous communities, there's less pressure to cut down the forest for firewood or to clear more land for unsustainable farming.
So by improving human well-being, you directly reduce the threat to the chimp's habitat.
It's a perfect example of integrated conservation. A win-win.
And her foundation even teamed up with NASA, which sounds like something out of a movie.
It does, but it's very practical. They used Landsat satellite imagery to get this high-resolution, bird's-eye view of deforestation in Western Africa.
And they gave that data to the local communities.
Yes. They could show villagers exactly where the forest was disappearing and help them develop strategies to protect their own local resources. It was putting high-tech tools in the hands of the people on the ground.
As she became more of an activist, her focus expanded beyond just primates. She became a really powerful voice for all animals, eventually becoming a vegan.
Right. She was a vegetarian for a long time and then went fully vegan in 2021. She even wrote a book called Eat Meat Less. And for her, this was a direct extension of her scientific work.
How so?
She argued that farm animals are, in her words, far more aware and intelligent than we ever imagined, and that they deserve our respect. She really challenged people on this, questioning how someone could say they love animals and then eat meat from creatures that were treated so cruelly.
And she took that fight to the political level, campaigning for systemic change.
Oh, absolutely. She lobbied the European Union to ban the caging of farm animals. She was a vocal critic of using animals in medical research. She co-founded groups like ethologists for the ethical treatment of animals.
And she had a huge victory for chimps right here in the United States.
A massive one. For a long time, wild chimpanzees were listed as endangered, but captive chimps were not. She petitioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to list all chimpanzees, including captive ones, as endangered.
Why was that distinction so important?
Because it offered them much greater legal protection. It made it much harder to use them in research or trade them. And in 2015, she won. The government classified all chimpanzees as endangered, a huge win for animal welfare.
And her focus just kept getting bigger. Most recently, she was advocating for something called ecocide to be recognized as an international crime.
Ecocide, it's a radical idea. The argument is that mass damage and destruction of the environment should be treated as a crime on the same level as genocide or war crimes.
And she said the idea was long overdue.
She did. It shows how her thinking evolved, from studying one group of chimps in one forest to advocating for a legal framework to protect the entire planet.
Yeah.
For all the serious science and the global activism, Jane Goodall also had this really unique public persona. She was a rigorous scientist who was also surprisingly open to things that were a little bit out there.
You're talking about Bigfoot.
I am talking about Bigfoot.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
She was openly receptive to the idea that there could be undiscovered large primates out there, things like Sasquatch or the Yeren in China.
What did she actually say about it?
She said she was fascinated by the idea and would actually love them to exist.
Yeah.
She did admit it was strange that no one had ever found a body or even, a single authentic hair. But she kept an open mind.
Which I guess makes sense for someone who spent her early career being told by experts that what she was seeing was impossible.
I think that's exactly it. She knew what it was like to challenge the established dogma.
And she also had a very deep and personal spiritual side that she wasn't afraid to talk about.
No, she wasn't. She was raised in a Christian home, and even as a young woman, she was exploring other ideas, taking classes in theosophy. She said that when she got to Cambridge, she found that atheism was very common among her scientific colleagues.
But it didn't sway her.
She said her own beliefs were already pretty well formed by then. But the real turning point for her spiritually came later, in 1977, when she had what she described as a mystical experience in the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris.
What came out of that experience?
She wrote that after that, she knew she had to believe in a guiding power in the universe. In other words, I must believe in God.
Did she ever define what that meant for her?
She was always clear that it wasn't a rigid, dogmatic belief. She described it as a great spiritual power that she felt most strongly when she was out in nature. And for her, there was never a conflict between that and science.
Right. She saw no contradiction between believing in God and understanding evolution.
Not at all. For her, there were two complementary ways of appreciating the wonder of the natural world.
Now, we also have to touch on a difficult moment in her career, a real academic stumble that happened in 2013 with her book, Seeds of Hope.
Yes, this was a serious controversy. The book was all about the importance of plants. But just before it was released, a reviewer for the Washington Post discovered a major problem.
Plagiarism.
Yes, multiple passages were found to have been listed, without attribution, directly from various websites.
And the sources were just kind of random, weren't they?
Incredibly random.
Yeah.
There was text from a website about organic tea, another one on tobacco, an astrology website of all things, and several passages taken straight from Wikipedia.
That's not a good look. How did she explain it?
She apologized immediately and took full responsibility. Her explanation was that it was an unintentional result of her chaotic note-taking while traveling constantly.
And the publisher had to pull the book.
They did. They delayed the release, and she and her team went through a massive review process, adding all the proper citations and credits. The book was eventually re-released in 2014, but with 57 pages of endnotes added to fix the errors.
It's a real mark on an otherwise stellar record. Before we wrap up, there are a couple of fun, humanizing details I think we should mention.
Please.
For all her work with chimps, her favorite animal, she always said, was the dog.
I love that.
And she also had prosopagnosia, which is face blindness. She had real difficulty recognizing people's faces, which must have made a life of constant public appearances incredibly challenging.
That's amazing. And we cannot end this section without talking about the Far Side cartoon.
The ultimate pop culture moment. It's from 1987 by Gary Larson. It shows two chimps, one is grooming the other, finds a long blonde hair, and says the line.
Conducting a little more research with that Jane Goodall tramp.
It's an iconic cartoon, but the initial reaction from her institute was not great.
Not great is an understatement. The lawyers for the Jane Goodall Institute were furious. They called it an atrocity and were apparently ready to sue.
But then Jane herself, who was out in the field at Gombe, finally saw it.
And she loved it. She thought it was hilarious. She later said it was her favorite thing ever done about her in pop culture. The whole thing was smoothed over. And Larson ended up being a big supporter of her work.
And there's a perfect ending to that story, isn't there?
There is. A year later, Gary Larson actually went to visit her at Gombe. And while he was there, he was attacked by a chimp named Frodo.
Frodo was one of Flo's sons, right? And known for being aggressive.
Notoriously aggressive.
Yeah.
He attacked humans all the time, including Jane herself. It was a pretty stark reminder for Larson that these were not cute cartoon characters. They were powerful wild animals.
A life lived right to the end. She died on October 1st, 2025, at the age of 91, peacefully in her sleep while she was in California on yet another speaking tour.
Still working. And the tributes that poured in from all over the world, from Prince Harry, Al Gore, the UN Secretary General, it just showed the sheer scale of her impact. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was a global conscience.
So as we wrap up this very deep dive into the life and legacy of Jane Goodall, let's just quickly crystallize the three big transformations that defined her career.
Okay. First, you have the pioneering field researcher, the one who changed the methods of science itself by insisting on using names, on seeing personality, on getting close.
Second, she was the revolutionary scientist, the one whose discoveries, especially about tool use and social complexity, completely redefined the line between human and animal.
And third, she became the global activist and institution builder. After that 1986 conference, she dedicated her life to advocacy, creating massive, lasting organizations like the Jane Goodall Institute and Roots and Shoots that will carry her work forward.
We started this discussion talking about how her early work forced us to see our similarities with chimpanzees, the tool use, the affection. It challenged our idea of being special.
But then her later discoveries about the Gombe War, the infanticide, the darker side, that forced her and us to confront a different kind of similarity, a shared capacity for violence.
Which leaves us with a really challenging final thought. If this complex social structure that allows for love and cooperation and learning in chimpanzees also enables savage, organized brutality, what does that say about us? About the inevitability of our own conflicts?
It's a profound question. If we share both the light and the dark with our closest living relatives, if both are part of our deep evolutionary inheritance, where do we find the hope and the will to choose one over the other?
A powerful question to leave you with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the incredible legacy of Jane Goodall. We hope you feel a little more informed and maybe a lot more inspired.